Evening, you can start.
Yes. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Today, we are in the second series of our talk. 2 weeks ago, if you all remember, we have talked about the outlook in 2022, which does not look very optimistic in terms of economy due to two factors. One is because of low productivity. There's almost no productivity this year. As now we are already in the second half of the year, we already feel that strain coming in. And also in terms of financial, there will be also a lot of financial challenges, especially now we are seeing in a lot of nations. And this talk, PC and I have purposely scheduled before the August because due to a very major reset that will expect to happen in August from the astrology calculation. Later on, I will explain on the astrology calculation and what is exactly happening. Okay, so we term that this is a clash in terms of astrology, means that there's a clashes in the element. And normally if the clash in element, there will be big change. So this is how, that's why it says that the clashes in August time frame will bring potential reset globally. And it seems that we are also trending towards that direction per the studies, per the analysis or the research trend that PC has conducted. As usual, there will be a disclaimer here. The content is purely based on our study in the global trend related to the 5 elements in Chinese astrology and also in the research of the world's geopolitical and financial economic situation, which you can use as a guideline for your investment decision. And you need to exercise caution in the investment, especially in such volatile situation. So you will need to do your own research on the company that you wanted to invest, not only on the commodity, but also on the company itself. And we will not give any stock advice as we are also not a financial advisor. Let's recap a little bit on the energy charts that we have for this year. Okay, we have a lot of woods and also water, and this is the focal point of the earth on the day itself. Let me just, here the water is here and here, the month and the year is a repeat, means that there will be challenges in terms of finance because the focal point here is still the earth, and the water is actually represent the wealth of the year itself, and they are all exposed. What we do is that this is for the whole year, and every month this pillar will change. Okay, this month pillar, it will change. This month pillar, it will change, and from there we will get the outlook for the month itself. Let's look at the upcoming month, which is actually in August. Okay, and in August we find that if you look at the year pillar itself, is water and wood, and in the month pillar is actually the earth and also metal. What happened is that in the 5 element relationship is actually a heaven and earth clash. Whenever there's a heaven and earth clash happening, there will be very major changes expected to come. So how we look at the clash, the year is a water, right? And we will have the earth clash into the water here. Okay, you can see the earth is clashing into the water, and also the tree, the metal is chopping into the tree. So this whole thing is a clash. And what will change? That is the next questions. We will look at the focal point of the year itself, which is earth. And what happened is that the elements is being clashed as water. Water represents financial. That means expected that there will be financial changes. And also, if you look at the earthly stem, is actually the wood. means that there will also be would control of its government, is related to government regulatory. So there will also be a change, a reset in the government or in some major nations' government, and where the matter will chops into the government itself. And later on, we will correlate that studies with the geopolitical changes on how it changed in terms of financial and also in terms of government itself. And if we look at the month pillar itself, this also translates into etching of dispersion, means that there is a wind. This is water. If you look at down there, 1, 2, 3 line, this is actually one full line, 2 broken lines is actually water, and this is wind. That means wind is blowing on water. When wind is blowing on water, it's creating ripples. Okay, so it also shows a ripple of change by itself, and it shows instability as well. Whenever we have this type of hexagram, that means it's not a good sign at all from where we are heading. Means if I were to be an investor, I will be very careful at this time. It could also be an opportunity to, look into potential buying into good assets. There will be a chance there if you look at it. So this is the overall changes that is coming, because all the while, I think people has been saying, big changes are coming. And the question is when. To me, when I look at the chart here from the Chinese astrology, with the major chain of heaven and earth being clashed, means that August, there will be quite a lot of resets, a lot of chaotic things that is going on, clashes, changes that is not going to be very pleasant. Okay, so far, I think this is my analysis on the coming August. It will start actually on August 6 or 7. Okay, so at least this is to prepare you on what is coming. Any question from the Chinese astrology point for the changes? Okay, no, then I think PC, you can continue with your analysis and check whether it correlates with this Chinese astrology chart. Okay, and later we will do a summary also.
Yep, thank you, Evelyn. Okay. So let me just share my screen. So let's talk about the changing economic landscape. Now, I think just yesterday, the EU came out with their so-called agreement, that the EU countries would consume 15% less energy in the coming months prior to the winter, so that they can stock up their resources, energy resources before winter. And this can actually worsen the current condition. For example, in Germany, the PPI is already up 32%, and the business confidence level is down to multi-decades low. So that means that Germany, being the powerhouse of the industrialized EU, will actually face a lot of problems, and potentially some of the industries may have to see further losses, or if not, eventually they may have to suspend operations because they cannot mitigate the rising costs. Now, that is why I think the EU could be facing economic calamity because of inflation and ongoing energy crisis, and because a lot of the companies in Europe has been what we call put on tubes, okay, which means they are supposed to die, okay, but they have now become zombie companies because they are using the debt tube to keep pumping money into these loss-ridden companies in order for them to sustain. keep on sustaining these companies because they are afraid of major job losses. So that's why I think if the inflation and with the EU also just increased interest rates, and because of these dual issues, these companies may really have to close. And if, let's say, they close, that means that the debt that investors have bought to support these companies, or the EU itself has supported these companies, means that, you know, the debt will not be able to be recovered. And if, let's say, we have that, then the ECB could be in for a major problem, because if a lot of the companies that becomes zero rise, okay, which means the company failed, then it will blow up the ECB balance sheet, because the debt which the ECB bought from the market is actually its assets. So meanwhile, the ECB has not actually started QT at all. It's still doing QE, because it had promised that it will support the weak nations. So that means that whenever when the ECB keeps on printing money, money that is printed is always a liability. But when the quality of the asset, which the debt that it buys, keep on falling, that means that at some point in time, the ECB could have negative equity. And that could be a signal that many countries within the EU would have lost confidence in the ECB. Now, that could herald a financial crisis in the EU. So I cannot be certain that all this will happen in the month of August, but definitely we can see all this snowballing into August, okay? Because already the signs are there, okay? The business community in Germany are already voicing out, okay? And people are already, you know, demonstrating against the harsh economic landscape. So, and in the US, for sure, the US is already in a recession. Q1 GDP fell 1.6%. Atlanta GDP now forecast is at 1.6% up to last week. But yesterday, there's also some economic indicators which are very negative. So that means that the Atlanta GDP forecast, which is going to update today, may see the growth of the GDP turning more negative. Now, I think recession is definitely in for the US, because 2 days ago, Janet Yellen, you know, the Biden admin want to front run the recession by shifting the goalposts. What I meant to say is that Janet Yellen came out and said that even though there could be 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, it does not signal recession, because jobs within the US is very strong, okay, and jobs should be considered as an important economic indicator. And besides that, Yellen stated that that whatever the outcome, it has to be measured against the Fed's own modeling. So this is like telling you that they are acknowledging that the second quarter GDP is going to be negative, and they want to front run it, saying that don't be mistaken, even 2 quarters is negative, it is not recession, because we have strong jobs growth, okay? And also we have to measure it against the Fed's expectation. So this strong job growth is actually a lie, okay? Because like last month, the US job growth showed a beat, okay? Hitting, I think, 300 over 1,000 jobs versus expectation of 200 over 1,000. But actually, the number of people that there were actually more people holding multiple jobs with a lesser amount of people holding a single job. So that means that people are finding the inflation as biting very hard, and therefore they are looking for more jobs, and that's why we see this expansion in jobs being created. Okay, but actually, if we look at the number of part-timers and the number of full-time workers, it actually fell. Okay, so that means that the job scope was created because people who are continued to be employed are actually working on more jobs, and that is telling you that the economic reality is not as good. Now, whatever jobs growth there is, jobs is always a laggard when it comes to deteriorating economic situation. So company won't fire someone or lay off someone before an economic event. Okay, they will only retrench people, lay off people when the economic event has started, and continue to foresee it being poor, and therefore they will actually cease to hire. So that is why job is actually a laggard, and I think the harsh reality would present itself in the coming months, just as the unemployment claims in the US is already moving up to an 8-month high. So that is telling you the deterioration in the US economy. Now, of course, in China, there is an immediate challenge in that there's a mortgage crisis in the making. Although currently it is said that it involves anything from a few hundred billion to almost a trillion or two, but there are certain changes that are going to come in. I think the mortgage crisis might not snowball into what the Western analysts expect, because China has created a new fund to help the development of stalled projects, so that it will actually allow the completion of the project. And according to a source of news that I have received last night, I have not verified it as yet, China is approaching the more fundamentally strong developers in Hong Kong to actually help in completing the stalled projects. So most of the Hong Kong developers are very strong financially. They have vast amount of resources, which
like Gushing,
yeah, and the Quad Group, the Sun Hong guys.
Yeah,
okay?
the Quad Group.
Yeah, so I was told that China has approached all these developers in Hong Kong to help expedite the completion of all these projects. So I think at this point, then it could be arrested, because that problem could be arrested because a lot of the Chinese property players have always been highly leveraged. Yeah, in fact, companies like Evergrande, they do not only focus on the property development, but they went all the way to start their own electric car business. And also, when a company loses focus from their main business undertaking, then you can see a dispersion of resources, which can be very damaging if not done correctly. Yeah. So the other thing that is on the horizon is the mounting debt crisis in emerging market economies due to the strength in the US dollar and rising interest rate environment. Now, the US dollar, when it becomes strong, yeah, it makes a lot of companies and governments in emerging markets very nervous, because more often than not, given their poorer currency value in relation to the US dollar, most of them would borrow in US dollar, so that converted to local currency, they are able to splurge, okay, do a lot of things. But the moment when the US dollar start to rise, then you can see that, for example, the US dollar have risen close to 8% against the ringgit, 8 to 10% against the ringgit. So then, the burden of servicing that US dollar denominated debt becomes more expensive. And because of rising inflation, especially if governments need to borrow money to refinance a US dollar debt, then that cost becomes even more expensive. Okay, you'll be borrowing at a high interest rate to pay for loan or pay for borrowings that are done at a lower interest rate environment. So that could spell disaster for emerging markets. And some economies like Turkey, Pakistan, I think Argentina are in for a shock, and this could quickly escalate into major crisis. Even in India, the rupees have weakened significantly against the US dollar, and this could pose a risk also to the Indian economy. Yeah. So of course, in the midst of all this, we will have mounting disobedience, demonstration, and riots. Sri Lanka has already seen its government collapse. Draghi, the Prime Minister of Italy, have given his resignation, and Boris Johnson is already out. I think in the month of August, we can see some escalation, and that escalation would actually result in some collapse in emerging markets economies, and potentially we will see some Western economies also suffering. In particular, in the peripheral regions, okay, which means Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece, all these economies that have high debt would actually see more demonstration and civil disobedience, and really have civil disobedience in Netherlands, okay, and in Germany as well, because of the EU's policy. Now the EU ESG policy is actually destroying the entire EU's economy, in a sense that right now they want to restrict emission of nitrogen gases, which has a lot to do with fertilizers. So they are urging all the farmers to cut their fertilizers. So this is actually very nonsensical, or to the bordering to idiocracy, okay, because without fertilizer, you cannot have sufficient food. Without sufficient food, the price of food will escalate, and people would face hunger, and there'll be even more civil disobedience, demonstration, and riots. So it's like, because of wanting to fulfill the ESG policy, it's destroying the economies. But again, the EU,
okay.
Yeah. So the EU wants to destroy the farmers' economy in the EU, but meanwhile, because of the energy crisis, they are buying coal as an alternative to meet their energy needs. Okay, so coal actually emits the most carbon gases. Okay, but now you can see actually how double standard they are. Okay, so that's why this changing economic landscape, already we see some shift in policies. Okay, and this shift in policies would create even more challenges against the government, and I think it will escalate as the summer months becomes hotter, people's temperature rise higher, and there will be serious demonstration. I think
there will be global heating also. You know that now the global temperature is abnormally high as well.
Have to postpone all their flights because the runway has melted due to the high heat. Okay, no longer safe.
Yeah.
So I think there will be of course, I think the August we will see the shift in political situation, but let's look at the all this on our geopolitical segment. Now, talking about the changing financial landscape, now BRICS is planning its own reserve currency backed by the nation's currencies, similar with the IMF SDR, the special drawing rights. So, and right now, a lot of countries are applying to join BRICS. We have Saudi Arabia, we have Turkey, of course, Iran and Argentina will be admitted into the BRICS. Okay. Then all this actually shows one trend, the trend of de-dollarization. Now, especially when, why emerging economies want to join BRICS? Because BRICS have promised that their whole currency system would be based on fairer equity and not subject to the ratings. So that's why where emerging economies, their plight, okay, the plight of the nation is subject to what the rating agency sees. Okay, for example, due to political reason, they can actually downgrade. For example, they downgrade Russia's debt because the US government would not allow, investors of Russian debt to receive rubles as a form of payment. They must receive US dollar, but since Russia cannot have access to US dollar, the rating agency branded Russia's debt as poor, okay, rated very poorly. So that's why, due to political whims of the US, the rating agencies like Fitch, Moody's, and S&P, they can actually downgrade sovereign countries' debt to suit the political needs, and therefore creating, ripples of financial instability within a country. So because of that, a lot of countries sees the need to get out of the US dollar trading system. And if, let's say, they are out of the US dollar system, they can actually trade using their currencies, their internal currencies, and therefore it gives support to the local currency's strength. And that is where the appeal of BRICS currency lies. They will actually have a own reserve currency, and then you have multiple countries' currency, and they can trade not necessarily using the reserve currency, but between each other using dual currency swaps. Okay, it's just that the reserve currency is the main currency that all other nations would reference to. Okay, so probably the BRICS will see the inevitable collapse, okay, of the debt-based monetary system and need to insulate against it, or to hasten the collapse of the debt-based monetary system. Now, the debt-based monetary system here refers to the ECB, the Federal Reserve System, which allows these developed nations to actually print money, useless paper, and buy resources from the emerging market economies, and also buy goods. Okay, so they just print paper, but they can consume the goods from other countries, consume their resources. So they see it as that they do not, they see an imbalance in this system. Okay, why is it that the developed economies have the most say, okay, in terms of voting rights when it comes to IMF and World Bank, but they consume the most from the emerging economies? So that's why BRICS see the imbalance. And actually, BRICS wanted to have more voting rights in IMF when they proposed, I think was in 2010, that they said that they wanted to have more voting rights, but they will inject 70 billion US dollars into the IMF fund. But the US aligned IMF decided not to allow it, and therefore they started their own new development bank. Okay, and right now the new development bank has members from, they actually expanded the membership to Bangladesh, okay, to Uruguay, and to UAE, as well as Egypt. Now, you can say that these countries have little significance when compared to the developed nations, but compared among themselves, Bangladesh economy has grown by triple digits over the last 10 years. UAE is the trading hub and major gas producer. It's also a financial hub in the Middle East. Egypt economy is, I think, is ranked the top few in terms of purchasing power parity. And Uruguay is number 3 in terms of purchasing power parity in South America. So all these countries, measuring by purchasing power parity, or PPP, means that these countries have the ability to continue to grow because of their growing population. Yeah, and then there's another development that is coming up, which is the EU plus China, which is working on a reserve currency backed by commodities and the nation's currencies. Yeah, so this means that there is a dual system right now in the making. BRICS would be more encompassing because it covers South America, Africa, Asia, and Europe. Whereas EU is actually Central Asia, Eastern Europe, as well as Russia and China. So this currency is an experimental currency because they want to back this reserve currency by using the country's commodities as well as currencies. Now, the importance of it is that, of course, Russia has 70 trillion worth of resources, okay? And China is the world industrial giant, okay, which can actually have the production capacity, okay, besides the monetary resources. So that is why Russia and China would play a lead role in helping develop a reserve currency that is backed by commodities and other nations' currencies. So the weight of each currency will be based on each country's GDP. So that is why it depends on the capacity of each country, how they will actually be weighed against that reserve currency. Of course, if a countries have vast resources, but their GDP is somewhat lacking, then it still have a fairer chance of getting a proper weight in terms of measurement. So this is an experiment and it will take a longer time. But BRICS, I think, will start very soon, okay? Because as I mentioned, BRICS nations sees a potential imploding of the debt-based system because the debt has become unsustainable. And hiking interest rate to combat inflation will just create more debt crisis. So that's why I think they are in a rush right now to come up with a reserve currency so that they quickly insulate themselves against a potential collapse of the Western-based monetary system. Now, as they develop the commodity-backed currencies, I think then it will absorb into the BRICS. It will merge together as one. And once that is done, then the BRICS reserve currency will be very, very strong because it will be backed by commodities. So that is the kind of changing financial landscape that is moving now at a much faster pace to herald a change, okay, a shift over from the US dollar-based system. Now, of course, the biggest question is, when will the Fed pivot given the deteriorating economic conditions? Will it be in the month of August? If you have been following what the Fed has been doing, the Federal Reserve have not even really started on QT yet, okay? Although they have increased interest rate, and today likelihood they will increase interest rate higher, but the Fed actually said from the beginning of 1st of June, the Fed would actually have QT ranging at $47.5 billion a month over the next 3 months. So which means by July, end of July, the Fed would actually have embarked on a QT closer to 95 billion. But what's the surprise? The surprise is that at the end of last week, the Fed QT quantity tightening, which means reducing the Federal Reserve balance sheet, their total assets, have only been reduced a little bit over 10 billion. So what does that tell you? If the Fed cannot fulfill their QT policy, that goes to tell you that there is underlying financial stress within the system because there's a lack of US liquidity. So that's why they want to continue supporting the the financial market, and that's why they cannot launch QE to the tune of $47.5 billion a month. And on top of that, the Fed's reverse repo action, which is actually another method to pump money into the system, okay, have risen to more than $2 trillion per day. Previously, last year, it was at 1 trillion. And the year before that, it was less than 1 trillion. So that goes to tell a lot of stories that all this liquidity pumping goes to show that there is severe financial stress in the entire financial system. And August could be one that will test the Fed's determination whether they would want to continue hiking or not. Because if they hike today, interest rate would be around 2.25 to 2.5% for the Fed funds rate. Now, the last time the Fed funds rate reached 2.5% was in September 2018. And what ensued over there, over the next 3 months, was that the stock market dropped almost 20%. So right now we are back to that level, okay? So at 2.5%, it will be very testing for the Fed whether they can even at all push higher, because that would mean that there will be a blow up in the mortgage market, okay? There will be a blow up in the debt market in the US, because last time they did it up to 2.5%, the stock market collapsed close to 20%. So right now, the stock market has collapsed. If we look at the S&P, it has collapsed about 17 or 18%. So will at 2.5 add another 10 or 20% to it? Chances are it could, okay? And that's why, like Evelyn said, you need to be a bit more wary in your investment decisions, yeah? So it will also, the earliest indicators, economic indicators is showing that July is going to be another bad month. Okay, so whether by August, the Fed will then say that they are going to stop raising interest rate. So these are the things that, you know, in some ways indicate that the Fed may have to reset their policy. They have to redo their policy, or to change their policy depending on the economic situation. So now, of course, at the end of the day, I see a much larger picture for the role of the BRICS, okay, because the EU and BRICS will be merged into and expanded into the BRI, SCO, and ASEAN. Now, BRI is the Belt and Road Initiative, countries which are signed up with China in that regard. The SCO is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, okay, and of course ASEAN. Now, coming out of ASEAN, Indonesia has been the most vocal in urging ASEAN nations to trade using a bilateral swap of their local currencies with the Chinese renminbi, okay? And Indonesia is going to be, over the next few years, by 2030, Indonesia will rise as the 6th highest country in terms of GDP by purchasing power parity.
Yes,
okay?
Actually, in the next period, Indonesia is going to be also a nation to watch out for, because they are going to go very fast. They are all in the same latitude as China. So every nation there, they will have, you know, quite good tidings in the next 20 years. And I think the days of Indonesian mates will be over also.
Yeah, it will be the days of Malaysian mates in Indonesia. And then we are screaming, you know, how come our Malaysians are being maltreated? But that's how it is. You know, Indonesia economy have already powered up. Okay, so much so that just to share with you, Indonesia is one of the among the top few nickel mining country in the world. And all the while Indonesia is producing nickel and is sent to China to be manufactured into car batteries. So Indonesia decided that, hey, you know, we cannot be doing this all the time. Otherwise, we got no skills. Okay, what we have skills is actually in mining. So that's why they actually start to change and demanded that if you want our nickel, you have to develop the upstream business. So, of course, you know, a lot of countries would be saying, you know, wow, you want me to help develop, then, you know, our own economy would suffer. But what happened was that CATL, which is one of China's largest car batteries manufacturer,
Amperex.
Yeah, you know, they actually they are actually collaborating with Indonesia to start a battery plant so that they help Indonesia develop their EV industry.
Okay, in a way, because I'm also into battery for many years. I manage all this, even CATL, so contemporary Amperex. So what happened is that this Amperex, if they build plants in Indonesia, is also good for them. You know why? Probably they will bring the polymer cell, those like lightweight polymer cell that you see in your handphone. They are more manually manufactured because there are many shapes, forms, and size. So it's impossible to have very large scales like cylindrical cells that Tesla is using. So most probably they are going to bring that technology or that plant to Indonesia, and they will use that the cheap labor there to to start this manual process as well, because Indonesia can supply a lot of labels and these are all more manual process.
Yeah, I think in that sense, the Indonesia know how to leverage, because they actually have they have the nickel. So then they can demand, okay, that you help us develop, you can continue to have the mining rights. Okay, so that's why I think China would actually help Indonesia plan its new economy to a certain extent, and that's why Indonesia would rise as a powerhouse. Now, the other big thing is that, of course, the SCO, some of you might not have heard about it. SCO is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and it is an organization that covers Russia, China, India, Pakistan, a number of the other stance country, okay, in Central Asia. I can't recall which, but most likely will be those Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and also Kazakhstan.
Also,
okay,
yeah, something.
Yeah. So the stance countries. So and right now the emerging new partner of the BRI and with SCO Club is Iran. Okay. Now, with Russia, Iran, and China, they would actually have political and geopolitical clout over the entire Europe, Middle East, and Far East. And that could mean a lot of things. Okay. So that's why eventually all these blocks of countries would gradually merge in terms of economic and trading activities, using a lot of bilateral swaps in currencies. And that's why when you have ASEAN, when you have Middle East and Asia moving towards a BRICS currency, that is easily not forgetting Africa, okay, because BRICS, part of BRICS, South Africa is actually in Africa, and new members that are being considered will be Nigeria, which is a major oil producer. So including Africa, then you're talking almost like 80% of the global population, okay, because the US and Europe added together is less than 1 trillion people. The others are moving towards a bilateral kind of trade agreement with swap deals and all those. That would mean that a huge percentage of the trade will be outside the US dollar. And if let's say that happens, then we are going to see hyperinflation in the US, where all the money previously printed is now unwanted and is being shifted back to the US, and then US will have hyperinflation, and because of that, they cannot continue to print money. Okay, so when the full integration of this new monetary system across the relevant groups will hasten the development of trade outside the US dollar, and it will spell the end of the US global hegemony. So that's why this will take place, I think, over the next few years. But some immediate changes we will start noticing. And I think in the coming months, you will see this country announcing a bilateral swap with either China or Russia, okay? And this will continue, okay? Now, the other thing, the changing geopolitical landscape. The international rules-based order touted by the West will be challenged by the global South, which means a lot of the southern countries in a lot of the countries in the southern hemisphere. Now, actually, the international rules-based order is nothing but based on colonial ideals that is touted by the West. Because, for example, the US say international rules-based order to freedom of navigation. The US was never even a party to sign the conduct of marine. It is actually a resolution, with regards to the conduct in the seas. Okay, so US is not a signatory to it, but it keeps on harping about freedom of navigation. Okay, and demanded that others follow its own international rules-based order. So, and the other thing is that US is getting more involved with Taiwan, from politicians' visits to arms sales, further challenging China's red line. So now, just now I mentioned about the SCO and all this. Because of the growing clout, the US sees the urgency to actually rein all this in and destroy these economies before its own economy is destroyed. Okay, now this is something like the Thucydides trap, okay, in which which is one currently sitting global power will not accede to an emerging global power without a war. Okay, so that's why you can see US is trying to egg Taiwan into a declaration of independence, saying that they will support, is trying to get Australia involved, is trying to get Japan involved, Korea involved to defend Taiwan. But US will not defend Taiwan. It will just continue to sell weapons so that it benefits its military industrial complex. Yeah, so that's why we have NATO, South Korea, Japan, Australia, and sorry, a typo here. Forming an alliance against China and challenging the status quo. So this is something that is going to escalate, okay? Because the whole intention is to prevent Russia and China from expanding, because they are the only global powers that can challenge the US. So that's why they are getting a lot of countries to fight against this country, like recently.
Ukraine and all this.
Yeah, Ukraine is a proxy war, okay? And another thing is that Israel and US is also, there are talks that they are planning to launch air raid, okay, airstrike on Iran, okay, because Iran has got Russia and China support. Now, recently, Gazprom, Russia's largest oil and gas company, has signed a deal to invest 40 billion in Iran to develop its gas resources and build a pipeline from Iran all the way to India. Okay, and just last year, China announced a $400 billion investment in Iran over 25 years to cover everything from developing Iran's e-commerce, banking and financial institutions, to the development of petrochemical plants, and to development of Iran's security needs, okay, which means using China high technology, okay, to meet security needs, and also to help to allow Chinese military presence to protect their assets in Iran. So that was last year. So even before that, Russia has already an air base in Iran. So as China's military members enter into Iran to develop Iran's security needs, and then Russia, expanding their presence militarily in Iran, Iran will become a country to be reckoned with. Okay, and all the while, Iran has the option to block the Straits of Hormuz to prevent more than 20% shipment of oil from the Middle East to the global market. And that is the threat of Iran. And that's why when Israel and US are said to be planning attack on Iran, that means that there is some desperation, that Iran may grow to become much stronger. Now, in the Taiwan side, okay, definitely they want to create some trouble because the US would not want to have a direct war with China, but they would ask other nations to come and protect Taiwan, okay, so that China resources is being committed to the war, and therefore it will weaken China economically. So that is what the US wants, okay. So the other thing is that the US is also very mindful in the sense that because Argentina has also joined BRICS, okay, Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia has signaled their intention to join the group. So the US realized that its influence in the Middle East is being threatened. Yeah. So like recently, Biden visit to Saudi Arabia has been a disaster. Okay, but Russia's visit to Iran has been a huge success. So that is why I think eventually Saudi Arabia and Iran would come to terms with their own strategic needs. Okay, and I think Russia would play an important role in bringing all the parties together, so that to reject the US dollar. And even Saudi Arabia has signaled their intention to sell their oil to China using renminbi. Okay. Now, another development is that China is helping Saudi Arabia develop their missile program. Okay, because the Saudi kicked out the US Patriot system. The other thing is that once Saudi Arabia and Iran comes to terms, then the whole Middle East would be united. And Russia is already playing a role right now, in a sense that why Biden's visit to Saudi Arabia was a disaster, in that there's no way Saudi Arabia would allow the price of oil to be capped by the US, because right now they are enjoying tremendous profit. So what Russia did was that, it told Iran and Saudi Arabia and all the major oil producers, okay, it's okay, I will sell my oil to you at a discount so that you can sell your oil to Europe and to US at a high price. So that's how Saudi actually became very, very rich, and Iran as well. In fact, I read a report today, Iran's oil revenue increased 580%. So imagine if you are Saudi Arabia, Russia sells its oil to you at, let's say, 30% discount, okay, then you can sell at the market rate to your oil needs, okay, you can use it all for export because you're importing cheaper from Russia. So that means that, their revenue is going to be ballooned. And because of that, there's no incentive for OPEC, okay, to even accept the EU and US demand to cap the price of oil. Now, very dangerously, if let's say they enforce this, Russia already said that they will remove their oil from the market. And if let's say they remove their oil from the market, there are, JP Morgan's actually mentioned that depending on how much they remove, if they remove about 3 million barrels of oil per day, that would spike oil closer to $200 per barrel. And if they remove 5 million barrels of oil per day from the market, it could spike oil up to 380. You can actually, do a Google search, it's all there. So that's why this is how dangerous the situation has become in terms of, trying to cap the price of oil, because it would herald an inflationary process that would hit all countries, okay? All because of wanting to stop Russia, okay, from expanding, okay, its military action into Ukraine. And Russia will actually expand its military action into Ukraine. And so far, Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, have already stated Russia has no intention of stopping just at the Donbas area. And as I mentioned in previous episode, very likelihood Russia would expand all the way south and west to including Odessa and reunite with the majority of Russian-speaking people in Transnistria. So because of all this changing political situation, the long-standing petrodollar will be challenged because countries are rejecting the US demand, okay, to accept the cap in the price of oil. They are now rejecting all this. So that's why, all this would continue to develop over the coming years, and we can gradually see the US position weaken. And that is why the US is hungry for war, because according to the Pentagon paper, if the US does not stop China by 2025, China would be unstoppable thereafter. So that is why we see all this happening. Now, of course, in August, what will change dramatically? And that is Pelosi's upcoming visit to Taiwan. Okay, and China already has threatened that they might consider military action, okay, as a response. Now, I think it might not necessarily lead to a so-called kinetic action, but maybe an embargo on Taiwan. And of course, China already said that if Pelosi's visit, it will test, China's bottom line, and that could likely lead to a reset in US-China relations. And if, let's say, there's a reset in US-China relations, China would actually then go all out, okay, and support Russia and Iran. That means that since if the relations turns bad, okay, US may implement a lot of sanctions, okay, like Russia. Russia previously was holding back on Iran because of the threat of sanctions. But since that Russia now is the end receiver of the worst of sanctions, Russia say, okay, so be it. I'm going to develop with whoever I please, whoever that serves my geopolitical, economical, as well as financial needs. So that's what, definitely it's going to be something very serious. And I think it's going to be a reset in US-China relations. And right now in the US, we have people from the Republican Party saying that Pelosi should go to Taiwan. Otherwise, US will be seen as fearful of China. And if, let's say, US is seen as fearful of China, then, US would lose face in the geopolitical environment. And that's why they say that, Pelosi should not cancel, Pelosi should go all the way in. And, show that the US is not fearful of anyone. So that's why we will know this in the next few weeks, okay, whether Pelosi would actually visit or not. But definitely, if there is a visit, we can immediately see a reset in US and China relations. Yeah.